I love being here. Thank God for coffee. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Meira K Show. I am Meira, pretty self-explanatory. Grab your coffee, your water in my case, and let's get talking because we've got a busy episode this week. So, we'll be talking about Egypt, Yemen, Lebanon, Syria, internal politics, external politics, America, Trump, Netanyahu, new laws that are being pushed, the IDF, the Orthodox. There's a lot happening right now in the news cycle, so let's dive right in. I'm going to start with the news that bothered me the most, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on if this is totally crazy or not, but there was a party that was arranged for the survivors of Nova, their families, and 10 released hostages, and it was supposed to be in the Negev, down south, right by the Egypt border, and the party got cancelled because the police or the military or whoever's in charge of security claimed that they couldn't protect against a potential Egyptian escalation. I don't know if this sounds kind of familiar to you, but it sounds like what should have happened before the Nova party. But the fact that we're still dealing with contentious borders and parties that are being cancelled because of potential infiltrations means that we need to talk about the bigger picture here. The fact that we're getting used to enemies on our borders capable of infiltrating and hurting us again. And this is kind of worrisome, as you could probably imagine, as a civilian of Israel and as any person in this country can tell you, we don't want to live with a daily fear of Egypt perhaps infiltrating. Israel needs to take a hard line with our enemies, and this is a philosophy that you're going to hear on this show consistently. I do not believe that we need to keep on going with this kind of consensus that we've always had, which is terror on our borders, which we just allow and therefore cancel our own events because perhaps Egypt might infiltrate. To me, that's a terrifying thought, totally unacceptable, and obviously something that you will just not see on the news because the mainstream media in this country, and I'm going to show you guys a really interesting thing in about 20 seconds, the mainstream media in this country likes to cover things that are contentious, but often doesn't cover real security threats and where the focus of the entire nation should be. So I'm going to show you two things in Hebrew right now, which I just opened the news this morning to my right-wing news sources and my left-wing news sources, and I was so struck by the contrast. This is the right-wing news source, and it says here, it's a released hostage, Elia Cohen, saying, "Your prayers were felt in the tunnels, they kept me safe." Such a beautiful sentiment, such a uniting sentiment, something that I think all of us feel good reading this in the morning, knowing that there's so much bad stuff happening in the country, but you know what? We're doing something, and hopefully all the hostages will be released soon, but we're helping them. Now let's focus on the left-wing media in this country. And by the way, this is Ynet, not known as a crazy left-wing news source, but it's pretty to the left, and you'll see this. This is the top headline. Zinuk shel 30% ba'alimut neged Palestinim. An increase of 30% in violence against Palestinians by Israelis. It's pretty self-explanatory which one is doing good for the country and which one is doing bad. Now, is violence against Palestinians a good thing? Absolutely not. I'm not a terrible human being. But that being said, has there ever been a time where a country is at war with another country and feelings within the country have created animosity towards the enemy? It's not complicated. I think if you looked at the statistics of any country at any war, you would probably see an increase in violence. This makes it look as if Israelis are specifically violent and specifically terrible towards Palestinians, when you know what? I just want to remind you of how the Palestinians are violent towards the Israelis in return. And again, I'm not trying to justify an increase in violence, obviously not, but it's also part and parcel of a war and of living with people who want to kill you. Violence will increase. Putting a headline like this is so detrimental, not just to the country, not just to the unity, not just to the feelings of the people internally, but also externally. It's taking something completely out of context and not writing about the fact that it's amazing that violence hasn't increased more with the amount of hate and anger and frustration that Israelis have towards Palestinians. Honestly, they tried to kill us. They've been open and inherent about that. They have our hostages. They're supporting it. They're taking our taxpayer money consistently to keep on funding terrorism. Of course, Israelis are angry. It's kind of a given during a time of war, and just putting this as a headline is so detrimental to everybody and something that I find unbelievably frustrating within the left and right media here in Israel. It's not really talked about, the contrast, the extreme contrast, and I think that's why JNS is such an important news source. So good job to you guys for listening to us on here. But we are fighting something that's a little bit more extreme than people realize. A very deep internal domination of the media by the left here in Israel, and it kind of needs to stop. So that's this morning's interesting contrast between the news sources and what they've chosen to set as the agenda for the day. We're going to rewind and return back to the geopolitical situation happening here in Israel. We've got the Egypt border down south, partnering with the Gaza border. We're going to talk about Gaza in a second and everything that's going on with the hostages. But first, let's talk about the wild west of Israel, known as the Negev, the desert, and almost 50% of our land. Why are we talking about this? Because there's been some interesting news. And it's kind of heartbreaking, honestly, but there have been some animals that have been caught who have been illegally smuggled. We're talking about monkeys and lions, and this is by the Bedouins. I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Bedouin population here in Israel, but it's a big population, and they dominate the south, and unfortunately, not only do they dominate, they also live a life basically of crime. Now, it's not all Bedouins, but the crime is rampant down south. And one of the things that's coming up as of late is their tendency not just to be polygamous, by the way, the polygamy capital of the world is the Bedouin community down south, but also to smuggle in and steal animals and not take care of them properly. And it's heartbreaking. But you know what was really interesting to me? Everybody's seen these videos of the lions who look like they've been starved, baby cubs and baby deers, and it's just a terrible situation. But how desensitized the media has made us that we feel more frustrated about the fact that they are not taking care of animals properly than when we hear that they are murdering women left, right, and center, or, killing people and stabbing people, which is a norm down south. Now, I'm bringing this up because this is now part of a much bigger controversy. A problem that Israel has is that we don't have enough land in the middle of the country, and we need to keep on building. And the Negev is somewhere that everybody thinks we should populate. This was Ben Gurion's dream 100 years ago or 70 years ago or whenever it was. He dreamed of us repopulating the Negev, but it's a really hard thing to do when you've got thousands, if not tens of thousands, of criminals running around and dominating the area. And the police of Israel have talked about this a lot, and there's a lot of money trying to be funneled to figure out how to solve the crime down south and hopefully to rebuild and repopulate this country with more Jews living in the south of Israel, because that's what we need, repopulation. The more we live in an area, the safer it becomes. And this is something obviously that goes back to the West Bank. And there was actually a very interesting report this week that came out that 70% of Israelis believe and feel strongly that repopulating areas will help reduce terrorism and crime within the country. And we're specifically talking about the West Bank. This week, obviously, there were more terror attacks and more IDF missions within Jenin and Tulkarem, and a little baby was injured by rocks being thrown. And there's been footage of more and more Palestinians infiltrating and the IDF going in to arrest Palestinians who are here illegally. The whole thing is a bit of a mess, and it's leading to a crisis within the country because Palestinian workers are a huge part of our construction. And if we're going to talk about the economy in Israel, which we're going to have to do a deep dive into another episode, and maybe we'll bring an expert on to explain it a little bit more, the economy of Israel is actually doing much better than you would think. Much better than you would think, but specifically the area of construction, which is the most important thing, as most Israelis feel right now, to rebuild the country, to allow for all the Jews coming into Israel, and to create more safety, because when we live somewhere, we control that area, and we don't allow for more Palestinians and terrorists to infiltrate. A big problem that we have is that we're lacking manpower to build, to literally just build the land. And that's something that Israel is going to try and have to figure out. I don't know if you know about the policies, but allowing people to come in and work in Israel is really, really complicated. An interesting fact is that it's really, really hard to get domestic help within Israel because people from other countries who would come in here and do well on the salaries that Israel would provide are not allowed to. And so there's a lot of laws kind of trying to be moved forward in that area to see if we can help boost the economy. And whilst we're on the topic of laws in the Knesset, there is a really unbelievably crazy and undemocratic law being pushed right now, which is insanity in my opinion. And I'm going to call it out because it's just unacceptable. There's a member of Knesset called Tali Gottlieb, and she is trying to increase the level of immunity that Chavrei Knesset get, that members of Knesset get, to a crazy point. Meaning they would be able to commit basically any crime they wanted, except for extreme crimes, and never be punished for it. Obviously, this kind of law is never going to pass, but the fact that our taxpayer money is going into this and our member of Knesset's time is being wasted on this is just unbelievably infuriating. And this is the kind of thing that would get a lot of publicity here in Israel, and people are talking about it. Why would a member of Knesset be given full immunity for the rest of their life? That seems like unbelievably idiotic thing to do, not just from a legal standpoint, but also from a precedent standpoint. Meaning that all you have to do is become a member of Knesset to become a criminal in this country? Absolutely not. There's no way this law is going to pass, but you're probably going to hear about it because people are angry, and it's definitely undemocratic. If you're wondering how I feel about this law, I'm against it, and I think it's wrong, and I think it is not something that we should be focusing on right now. And if we're talking about things that we shouldn't be focusing on right now, have you heard about the claims that Bibi has received money from Qatar, $15 million or so? Ugh, it's such rubbish. And once again, the media is trying to do everything in its power to destroy Bibi's reputation. And interestingly enough, Bibi actually responded to these claims. Now, I often wonder to myself, with all the negative claims coming out about Bibi and all the conspiracy theories, first of all, are any of them true? And it's possible. But the truth is, I actually don't really care about that right now. I want Bibi focused on war. I want him focused on dominating the Iran situation, Syria, Lebanon, Egypt, Gaza, hostages, economy. That's what I want him focused on. I don't care if he's done anything that isn't correct in the past. That being said, it's actually interesting because as somebody who is pro-Bibi, I would say, because I'm pro-democracy and believe that we've chosen him multiple times, and I honestly think he's the best politician probably to ever have lived. Although I'm against a lot of his policies and think he's made a lot of mistakes, I support him and I think he's a genius and he's very interesting, and I just love watching how he plays political things and how they come out in the end because he somehow always manages to come out on top. But the country hates him. A lot of people hate him, and this is incentivized and pushed by the media. The media literally comes up daily with news stories why Bibi is probably the world's biggest criminal. Now, I just want to say, if Bibi has been funded by Qatar 10 years ago or something, this would be probably the biggest scandal to hit Israel. An enemy state funding our prime minister, that would be total insanity. And more importantly, it would have been uncovered because the entire media and country is just looking for reasons to expose Bibi Netanyahu and to prove that he is a terrible, terrible human being. And so I don't think they could have kept a story like this quiet for 10 years. Honestly, I think it's more bogus, but it's interesting to note how quickly, once the media just starts to get something into your head, you start to question it. And I sometimes do question if Bibi is a terrible person behind the scenes or not. But again, as I said, I don't think it matters right now. I think what matters is us focusing on our country, on our war. And I think we have a very charismatic and capable leader who needs to be doing more. I don't think he's doing enough, who needs to be doing more. But I just don't think that he should be meeting the ambassador of Japan in the courthouse right now because the country is keeping him locked up in court testifying about goodness knows what during a time of war. I will say it once, I will say it again. I think it's a travesty, but it was interesting to note that he actually came out and talked about this today. He released a video stating that he thinks that this is just more and more bogus things that they're trying to incriminate him with, and I can't agree more. Now, interestingly enough, they're also looking into 3 of his advisors who potentially were funded by Qatar. Now, this is more likely and also possible, but the whole thing is under a gag order, which to me makes it even more suspicious. Why are they keeping it under a gag order? Not because I think this is any security threat to the country, but because I think they want it to seem more mysterious and to give it more credibility than it is. But again, if Bibi's advisors are being funded by Qatar, that's a big problem. And we will know about it. It will be the biggest media storm that this country can create. And right now it's just a story that's kind of like puttering out, but they're working on keeping it going. Oh, and just FYI, Netanyahu is suing the Boogie Ya'alon, the guy who's come out with these claims, for a lot of money because, as he should, you should not be allowed to make bogus statements about a prime minister or a president of a leading country, leading to more tax money going into investigations about things that we all know are just not true. Again, if Bibi did receive funding from Qatar, it will be the biggest controversy to hit a Western state. I think it would be bigger than Watergate. But the chances of it being true are very, very minuscule. Talking about more hot water that Bibi keeps getting himself into, we need to discuss the Haredi draft because as of this week, another 14,000 orders are going out enforcing young Haredi men to draft into the army. Remember, this is a 3-year service. And the Haredim have been pretty clear about the fact that they're just not going to go. Now, obviously, there's a lot of uproar about this, and people are furious that the Haredim, who are slowly growing to be probably one of the biggest group of Jews in Israel within the next 30 years, are not giving and contributing like the rest of the country is to the war. But once again, I think that this is one of those totally misconstrued topics that the media is just taking out of context to struck such an extreme way and not explaining what is really going on here. Fun fact about Meira. Maybe we should do a fun fact a week. Fun fact about Meira. This is a wig. I am Orthodox. I'm married to an Orthodox man who is serving in the army. And this is something that I feel very, very strongly about because it is just not correct the way the media presents it. I want to take a second to ask you to think about how you would feel if, I don't know if you're religious or not listening to this, but imagine that you were not religious and the Haredim ran the country and they commanded and said that you would have to go to study in yeshiva for 3 years and you were obligated to do it. And if you didn't do it, you would go to prison. Yeah, that gut reaction, that feeling of that's not okay, that's unacceptable. Well, that's how the Haredim feel about going to the army. Now, you don't have to lecture me and explain to me that it is much more complicated. And during a time of war, even our Torah says, our Bible commands us to go and fight. But we need to understand that this is not a conversation about what is right and what is wrong. This is a conversation about a cultural belief within the Haredi system that does not believe that the IDF is the correct way and tool to serve the country. It's not that they're deeply committed to the country. They're not. They're the most hated group within Israel. We know that. The media has done everything to hate on the Haredim left, right, and center. And guess what? The Haredim don't feel very warmly towards the rest of the country because of this. There is a huge amount of animosity, but it's more than animosity. It's a cultural difference. The Haredim feel strongly that it is God who protects the country. And the way that we get God's divine intervention to keep the country safe is by studying and learning. And it is the IDF who is trying to come in and take this from the Haredim. This has become a politicized issue when it is a cultural issue. If you want to see a shift, if we need the Haredim contributing to the army, which I believe we do, we need to actually think about what they believe, what they want, what they love, what they care about, and try and make a long-term cultural shift. Trying to force them to go to the army is like trying to force secular people to go to yeshiva. It's not going to happen. They are never going to acquiesce to this. And the biggest shame about all of this is that there's a massive shift within the Haredi society. It is slowly changing and shifting as more and more people within the society feel connected to Israel, feel like they want to contribute, feel like they would like to draft and be part of the army. My husband is one of them. We see this across the board. Just today, another 300 Haredi soldiers have gone. They're drafting because a lot of people feel like they want to contribute. But fighting the most extreme views in such a way, threatening them and making this into a political issue when really it's a cultural mistake. And I'm just going to say it out loud. Everyone wants to blame this on the Haredim, but the reality is that if the country had felt 30, 40, 50 years ago that this was an important issue and not a politicized issue, they should have started trying to create bridges with the Haredim to culturally connect them to the land. You can't ask people to fight for something that they don't idealistically believe in. Now, is that wrong? In my personal opinion, yeah. They should idealistically believe in the country because they live here, but they don't. And that's part of their education system, their culture. And that is what's going to need to shift if we want the Haredim to really contribute to the country the way that we feel they should. Until that point happens, this is not going to work. Forcing them, demanding them, sending them drafts, telling them they're going to go to prison if 15,000 of them don't start, it's just not going to happen. The leadership is fighting against this very strongly because, again, it's a cultural shift, a cultural clash. Something actually needs to change in a much bigger scale. Something needs to change over a long time to get the Haredim to contribute. And this, just hating on them and trying to force them, never going to happen. It's never going to happen. It's the most contentious issue right now in political media. It's the most contentious issue within the Knesset because the Haredim, they will leave the country, as a lot of them have threatened, before they will contribute. And that doesn't show us that the Haredim are bad. It shows that we have a cultural difference and an issue and a dissonance with a huge part of our society. And that's something that we have to fix. We need to bridge the gaps in the society. We need to create more understanding and more connection, not just keep on driving these hateful actions, which are just causing the Haredim to back off further and further and further. It's not making them draft. The threat of being arrested is not doing anything. What would make a difference, though, is trying to teach them and trying to include them in our society so that they see the value in contributing. And if the army can do everything in its power to accommodate the Haredi needs, then again, we will see more of a shift. But this whole political media thing, it's just shocking and it's sad, and once again causing more lack of unity within the country and hatred and animosity towards each other, when what we need right now is to be united. Every Jewish person feels that in their gut. We just need to be united. It's not about trying to change other people, but trying to connect to other people. And it's about time that the media and the country actually learns this. If we're talking about controversial things, let's watch this video. This is kind of sad. You probably never heard of Adam Bola until like 2 weeks ago. I don't think anybody had heard. He was an advisor to the Taliban and a negotiator, and he was designated by Trump to be our hostage negotiator, envoy, etc., something along those lines. There have been so many executive orders by Trump, so many new nominations, it's almost impossible to keep up. But Adam Bola has gotten himself into some hot water as well. Let's watch this video for a second.
Our focus in the United States is not going directly to terrorist organizations because we don't want to support it. That's my view from my meeting with Hamas. I think a number of conversations were very specific to hostages.
this doesn't look good. It never looks good when you get somebody on camera committing to one thing and then a few days later revoking that and changing their minds. But specifically, this is something that Israelis are very, very, very angry about. Why? First of all, we can't legitimize Hamas and have direct negotiations with them. There's a reason Israel hasn't negotiated with them directly this entire time, and we had to use mediators because we cannot legitimize a terrorist organization to this level. The fact that Hamas, a lowly Palestinian group of terrorists, get to be in direct talks with a president of the United States is insanity. It's wrong. It's not okay. And kind of a little bit goes against the policy of America. Don't negotiate with terrorists. But a bigger reason that this is making everybody feel a little bit perturbed is because it kind of looked like Trump had given Hamas an ultimatum, right? They said pretty quickly, give all the hostages back or all hell will break loose. And then we find out that secretly and silently, the administration is sending somebody in to negotiate a deal. Hezbollah wasn't sent in to Hamas to convince them to give all the hostages home. That would never have happened. He was sent in to negotiate something potentially. And that means that maybe we don't know exactly where we stand with the American administration. That's something that's scaring a lot of Israelis. Why is Trump claiming out loud that we are going to give them hell if they don't release all the hostages, and then secretly sending mediators behind Israel's back? It's a little bit conflicting and a little bit nerve-wracking because you don't want to be on the wrong side of Trump, as he has made clear. And specifically when it comes to the life of the hostages, it just feels like this is something that really, really puts their lives at danger. I have to say, my biggest worry is that if you're a negotiator, you should have a little bit more sense as to what you're going to say in front of a camera or to the people, or the promises that you're going to make in negotiations, because it's very easy to flip that on you. And this video is kind of worrisome from that perspective. But this is why Israelis are nervous about this. Are there secret negotiations going on behind the scenes? And the administration, Trump administration, has made it very, very, very clear that no, talks failed, Hamas are not willing to negotiate, blah, 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 exactly what we know all the time, but it's undermined a lot of the work that's happened here in Israel. It's frustrating, it's a little bit nerve-wracking, and hopefully it hasn't done any long-term damage. But obviously, if Trump is tweeting things like, all hell will break loose, and at the same time sending his negotiators behind the scenes. And I don't know if Trump was involved with Adam Bola. I don't know if Adam did this on his own. I'm not aware. But if Adam Bola is behind the scenes talking to Hamas directly, saying, yeah, we'll negotiate with you, you don't have to worry about Trump's tweets, that's a problem. Now, in addition, he got himself into more hot water by claiming that Hamas are kind of nice guys, normal people like us.
They don't have horns growing out of their head. They're actually guys like us. They're pretty nice guys.
And again, this is unbelievably undermining to the fact that Hamas are a terrorist organization. A terrible, terrible group of humans who raped, mutilated, burnt alive, killed, did anything possible to destroy the Jewish people on October 7th and have kept our hostages in terrible situation for so long, including American hostages. Why a negotiator would go around talking about these people as if they're nice. I mean, I do understand where he's coming from. He's trying to say that in the conversation, he was just talking to another person, but it was ill-timed and not the correct way to phrase it. And he then came out apologizing for this and trying to clarify that Hamas is a terrorist organization, yada, yada, yada. But the damage has been done. Israel's nervous. He's in a hot spot, and meanwhile, we're not moving forward with the hostage negotiations properly. So a different representative from the Trump administration has been sent to Qatar to try and figure out if there's anything we can do. Just a reminder, the ceasefire finished about 2 weeks ago, and we had hoped that the ceasefire would just kind of continue in the way that it would go, but we haven't had any hostage releases since then. What they're trying to figure out right now is if they can get 10 hostages or some number along those lines to be released in the next few weeks, or specifically, hopefully this weekend, in an act of good faith by Hamas, and the ceasefire will continue. Israel right now, its top priority is to get these hostages home. It doesn't really want to go to a full-out war with Hamas. But at the same time, as you all know my beliefs, I think that Hamas have had enough. They've had enough. We've given them enough. And this whole negotiation thing is bogus. We have to give them hell and force them. And one of the ways that we're forcing them is by stopping the electricity to the country. Now, I'm going to pull up this tweet because this tweet annoyed me and a lot of people online. Piers Morgan, come on, you can do better. Let's look at this. Breaking news by PA Media. Israel has said it is cutting off its electricity supply to Gaza. And then Piers Morgan responds saying, this is wrong. And it's wrong that Israel even retains the power over Gaza to do this. I mean, come on. Have we not yet clarified that it is not Israel retaining power over Gaza? It is Israel trying to help their incapable government i.e. Hamas, who focuses all of its money and time and infrastructure on building tunnels and trying to kidnap and kill Israelis instead of supplying electricity to their civilians. It is just so sad that leading people like Piers Morgan still haven't clocked that this is not about Israel trying to control Gaza. Just to strengthen this argument a little bit, we are at war with Gaza. We are at an extreme war with Gaza, and we have been for 520-something days. And yet we haven't really cut off their electricity yet. We don't use this as a power play with them. We haven't until this point where it's just gotten so crazy. It's our last resort to force Hamas into negotiations. If we were using our electricity as a way to control Gazans, don't you think we would have used it more by now? Yes, at one point we should have got electricity for a little bit, but the reality is we've been supplying them the entire war. We don't use these things to control Gaza. We use these things to support and help them because their government is incapable of doing it because they're terrorists. Ugh. I mean, it's such a simple, self-explanatory thing. And once again, they just have the narrative so wrong. They believe we're trying to control them, and we're not. But you know what? It's a great thing. But I just want to say that most Israelis feel, and I definitely do, that it's a great thing that we have stopped electricity to Gaza. And no, not because I'm a terrible person, but because I care more about the hostages than I care about the Palestinians, who have done absolutely nothing to take care of my people who they are keeping captive, who have done absolutely nothing to support peace and continued talks with Israel. They just want us dead, and so they don't deserve our electricity. I see no reason that I pay taxes and that money should go to taking care of my enemy. Makes no sense. Not to me and not to most Israelis. And people are hoping that we'll cut off water next. Again, not because we're a country that lacks humanity, but because we're a country that realizes that if we don't get our hostages home, who are we? And we need to do everything in our power to do that. There is no reason that my money should be going to giving them water, giving them electricity, giving them anything. They should figure it out for themselves. And that's what I think about this. Okay, as promised, let's talk a little bit about Iran, Syria, and Lebanon borders. We've also got the Houthis. Do you remember them? That Yemenite group of terrorists supported by Iran who have been firing rockets at us all day. Well, they've threatened that today, and we might have a siren any moment actually, they've threatened that today they're going to restart firing ballistic missiles at us. Why did they stop? Because we had a ceasefire with Gaza, and the ceasefire is kind of dwindling out a little bit. We're not sending aid, so they're trying to threaten us again. Now, it's interesting. The ballistic missiles don't really do any damage to Israel. So why do the Houthis spend so much time and money and effort firing one at us randomly every other day? Because this is something that we have to understand about the mentality of these Islamic terrorists. It's not about winning. It's about the psychological terror. They think that every time that they get all Israelis to cower in fear from them, to run, to stop their lives, to go into bomb shelters, that they've accomplished something. That they're showing who's in control, that they're staying on the top of the agenda. And it's true. That's what they're doing. It's not actually about them trying to kill Israelis because they know that we're going to intercept these ballistic missiles. And worst case scenario, somebody might get damaged, you didn't run to a shelter. It's more about the fact that they enjoy this feeling of respect. We have Israelis doing whatever we want them to do. And that's a problem that I think that Israel should be dealing with by getting rid of this Houthi threat. Again, these Houthis are just creating chaos, not just for us, but internationally. They're trying to destroy our economy by blocking ships, especially Israeli ships, yada, yada, yada. They're so annoying and frustrating. And I think America and Israel should just deal with them and show them the ramifications of messing with a proper state. Yemen has no money. The people are dying there of starvation, and yet the little money that they have is being funneled to ballistic missiles to Israel. I mean, seriously, are you so desperate to stay relevant? It's embarrassing. Next, let's talk about what's going on in Lebanon. So Nasrallah had his funeral last week, and I don't know if you guys saw this interview with Nasrallah's son, but he claimed that once Israel really started attacking different people and the Beeper operation, which was the most amazing operation, I think, in military history, Nasrallah changed, and he was crying a lot. Interesting to think of Nasrallah as somebody who kind of cried till he was killed, but I guess that's the fate he deserved. Kind of weird image if you think about it. A whimpering terrorist leader hiding in bunkers, afraid of Israel, waiting for it to come. Kind of like John Wick feeling, you know what I mean? I don't know if any of you watch John Wick, but that's how it feels to me. Okay, but after Nasrallah's death, which was in many ways kind of the end of Hezbollah, even though Hezbollah are still very much kicking and running, the new president of Lebanon has taken control, and he is trying to figure out how to make Lebanon a peaceful country once again. Once known as the Paris of the Middle East, Lebanon has become just a place of terrorism, and they want it to end. Now, there's a few problems with this because Hezbollah still have a lot of power within the country, and they want to reign terror over the country. Lebanon's trying very hard, and this new president is trying his best to create peace. Now, how's he doing that? He's trying to negotiate with Israel for us to stop the war. If you're not familiar, Israel is still located in 5 different locations in Lebanon, which Hezbollah have dominance on. Why? Because Israel has changed a little bit its philosophy, and I wish we would have the same philosophy down south, but it's changed its philosophy a little bit about Lebanon and Syria, which we'll get to in a second because what's happening there is insane. They've changed their philosophy a little bit, that we are no longer allowing them to really be on our borders and to be a consistent threat to us. We have to stop that. So we haven't pulled out despite the ceasefire agreement, and more than that, we also are holding some of their Hezbollah terrorists as prisoners in the country. Okay, we've got some of them detained. And so negotiations are going on right now with US and France and Lebanon and Israel to try and come to some sort of agreement. And so Israel yesterday released 5 of their prisoners back into Lebanon. Why? To try and help this Lebanese president gain favor in the eyes of Lebanon, showing that he is managing to bring back the prisoners, something that the Lebanese people feel very strongly about. Remember, Hezbollah has been indoctrinating Lebanon for years and years and years that Israel is the big enemy, the big threat, which is not true. However, every time we have a war and we try and go in and kill the terrorists, it just makes it look more and more like we have an issue with the Lebanese people, when I really, really promise you, most Israelis do not. We'd very much like to be at peace with them. But again, terrorism is something that we just can no longer accept. So we've returned 5 of their prisoners, something that I'm not sure how I feel about, but as a show of good faith to the president so that he can show up and say, look, we're creating peace, and try and remove Hezbollah's power a little bit by getting the support of the people, which is really, really important. Again, Israel has its own interests in keeping this president in power. He's supportive of having peace in the country, and that's really what we want. So that's what's going on with the borders. Our IDF soldiers are still stationed there, and they're trying to come to some sort of long-term peace agreement, and obviously the US is trying to be involved with that as well. Now, Syria. This is crazy what's happening there, because it's basically some form of ethnic cleansing. That's what we're seeing at the moment. And this is, funnily enough, kind of a parallel with Hamas. The philosophy of better the enemy you know than the enemy you don't. Right now, with the fall of Assad, who is a terrible person, and we all know that, this new terrorist organization has risen. And a lot of people were celebrating that they succeeded in coming and taking over the country and getting rid of Assad. But you need to remember that this is a terrorist organization. And even though this guy wears a suit, he is still a terrorist. And so are you surprised that they're out there slaughtering women and children and elderly and just doing whatever they want? They're terrorists. They're running this country, and it is not better for the country. Look, it's good that the Assad regime fell, but remember, a strong regime like that could only be taken over by somebody who's equally, if not more, cruel and barbaric. So time will tell. And because time will tell, Israel is aware that Syria could become potentially a very big enemy to Israel. So what we are doing is not just securing the borders, but continuously trying to destroy all of the weaponry and things that they have within Syria so that they don't end up escalating to become a bigger issue for our border. We took over their location in the Hermon, and this week our Minister of Defense made it pretty clear in the news that we are not going to be giving up the Hermon that we have taken over, because we want the Syrian rebels to, whenever they come towards the border and try and attack Israel, see that the IDF dominates from above. Now, there's another thing going on which is interesting, which is the Druze community. We're not going to talk about this so much. We mentioned them last week, but as we've discussed, we've got Bedouins, we've got Druze, we've got Palestinians, we have so many different groups within this country, which are often not talked about in the media. But we live at peace with them. So much so that we have offered to the Syrian Druze community to help take care of them and protect them against their regime, even offering to allow them to come into Israel and help us rebuild the north of Israel, which they have agreed to do. However, we also just got information today that the new Syrian regime has signed an agreement with the Druze people. And so whilst the Druze in Syria were our allies, we're going to have to see where this goes. Right now, everything is a little bit unstable but stable. The new regime doesn't want to attack Israel. They haven't made it a goal of theirs, but it is definitely a potentially very dangerous enemy. And so we're kind of keeping an eye on it. They're keeping an eye on it. But we are hoping that we can keep peace with them, keep the Druze Syrians safe, keep the Druze Israelis safe from Hezbollah in Lebanon, and all in all, try and somewhat secure our borders. It's actually crazy when you think about it that we're still alive. I mean, you're talking about, we haven't even gotten to Jordan. Maybe that'll be another conversation. But we've got Jordan, Israel, Syria, Lebanon. I mean, Gaza. It's just, we are surrounded by enemies, and yet still we thrive. We have enemies from within, enemies from without. And we're just the most amazing people in the world. if I can say that myself. I love being Israeli and I love being Jewish. We've also got this crazy situation going on with Iran where they're basically almost equipped with a nuclear weapon, which is a bit of a problem. And yes, we cannot allow for a terrorist organization, a terrorist country to have access to nuclear weapons. And finally, a lot of countries are believing this. I mean, the UN held a secret discussion that was obviously leaked to the media to try and figure out what to do and how they can sanction Iran. But you know what? This is how I feel about it. Enough with sanctions, enough with diplomacy. They are terrorists. They don't do diplomacy. End their nuclear abilities. Yes, that's what I think. I think Israel, supported by America, should stop with the ultimatums. We've made it very, very clear that we're not okay with them having any sort of nuclear power. Go in there and end it. Now, I know obviously it's not that simple, and this could escalate to a much bigger world war crisis situation, but Iran cannot be allowed, not just as an Israeli, as a Westerner, as somebody who believes in democracy, a crazy dictatorship country like Iran cannot have access to a nuclear weapon. And that should be the biggest threat that everybody feels right now. You know, like Israel survived so many of Iran attacks because of our ingenious technology, but I don't think we need to get there again. I just don't think we need to get there again. And I think that offense is always going to be better than defense when it comes to dealing with terrorists. So Israel is now currently under potential attack or threatened on all of its borders from all directions. Internally in the West Bank, externally Iran, Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Egypt, I mean, you name it. We are just the most amazing country in the whole world, that we have survived and we are thriving and we are continuing to become the most amazing country. I love being Israeli. I love being Jewish, and I want everybody to feel that way. And this is what we're going to end on, because finally the Eurovision song came out. It came out and Yuval Rafael did the most phenomenal job, because what she does with the song, and we're going to watch it in a second, is remind us that good times are coming. New days will rise. There is going to be a better future for the Jewish people. And that's what we're fighting for. That's why my husband's at war. That's why most of the men in my community are at war. We are fighting for the future of the Jewish people, and it is going to be amazing. So let's just end on this note. Do you guys notice, like, it feels a little bit like the Nova party?
Go away, you are the rainbow in my sky. My colors in the gray, my only wish.
See, it feels like Nova. It's like a reincarnation of the Nova people. It's beautiful. It's like a very subtle reminder of what we've been through. I choose the light. Amazing. See those red flowers? That's Israeli north. The Israeli south of Israel is covered in those flowers.
Don't cry alone. Darkness will fade.
Her voice. Oh, she's bringing our Bible, the Shir Hashirim, into this. This is it. This is the story of the Jewish people. The new day will rise. Even if you say goodbye, we have been through so much and we are still in the midst of so much. But we are going to rise again, and things are going to be good. And on that note, with all the craziness of all the news, I am going to end this episode. So thank you for being here. I am Meira, and I will see you next time.